meeting you.
State University in the School of Music. Behind me you see
see the combined efforts of not only myself, but the entire area, which comprises of 5 faculty. We're very lucky to have with us today Mr. Miguel Guzman. You may ask yourself, why are there so many mariachis? It's a very good question and a very valid question to ask. Again, this is the combined effort of 2 separate ensembles. Some of us meet on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and the others meet on Tuesday, Thursdays. Members of Mariachi Nueva Generación, hi. Mariachi Lince de Oro. We're honored to be invited and overjoyed to be here at the Whitliff Collections with all of you this afternoon. On behalf of, again, myself and everyone in the Latin Music Studies area, all faculty, students, administrative supportive staff, everyone, thank you so much. We're going to continue with another song that we've prepared for you in tandem, a beautiful valse titled Sentimiento. a son jalisciense titled La Vaquilla, about a little cap. And I think it's very appropriate that we're in a space that's featuring agrarian communities and that legacy. All the great things and all the not so great things that can happen when you're literally herding cows and cattle and all of that. Again, this is a son jalisciense. The son jalisciense is the son form native to the mariachi tradition, and it's also undergone a tremendous process. La Vaquilla. Before I go any further, I would be remiss if I would not mention the foresight and the vision of Dr. Jaime Jahin, who has invited us here today to perform for all of you. Thank you. been in collaboration with Mr. Guzman, but another Guzman from California, a 3-time Grammy Award-winning artistic director and administrator for Mariachi Los Camperos de Jesus Guzman, based out of California. They're the longest running mariachi in the United States, founded in the United States by Natividad Cano. And so they've gone on to form alliances with the Smithsonian. Mr. Guzman has been kind enough to lend us his arrangements, and he's going to be visiting us, he said soon, to come coach and help and just keep this tradition alive. I think next we're going to perform another piece arranged by him, La Viquina. Gracias. was the initial, this is the seed of why we're here today, celebrating with all of you in honor of Rolando Hinojosa. Dr. Chain called me and said, Adolfo, do you think you can learn a corrido? I said, well, I can. He said, you know, I have this vision, you know, we're going to honor Rolando Hinojosa. And there's this corrido written by Miguel Gallegos, correcto? Miguel Gallegos. So he sends me this recording, and I'm just moved by the lyrics, the form. And then later I asked Mr. Chain, well, who is Miguel Gallegos? Well, you know, he's a student and very talented. I believe no formal music instruction. Right. So I'm hearing this fully produced track, and I'm just astounded. I said, wow, that's going to be a challenge. So we, kind of start talking to myself and thinking about how we can conceptualize this more appropriately Tejano arrangement. Maestro Guzman was kind enough to arrange the musical portion of this, so thank you, Maestro Guzman. It's also with between my great friend Eduardo Lopez arranged some of the ending, and then of course myself, I'm going to tweak some things. So, but I'm not taking credit for that. We are honored to be in front of Rolando Hinojosa's family. Thank you so much, and we hope that we do this justice. And this is the gem, and this is what we've been working so much towards. I'm going to invite my. He's also a very accomplished accordion, I think, for corridos, and especially from Texas. This is extremely appropriate. Corrido a Rolando Hinojosa.
Well, usually I have to ring some sort of bell to get everyone's attention, and I don't think I need that today. That's a tough act to follow. Let's give them another hand so they can hear how. And they will be coming back at the end of the program, so I know we're all looking forward to that. I want to welcome you to the Whitliff Collections. If you've been here before, or if you haven't been here before, my name is David Coleman. I'm director here. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our event celebrating the great American writer Rolando Hinojosa. Rolando was a good friend of the Whitliff Collections. He came to many of our events. He donated books and other materials to us over the years, and we featured him in our public programs and exhibitions. He and Steve Davis, our literary curator, first met some 30 years ago when Steve must have been a baby, when he was a young grad student under the tutelage of Jaime Mejia here at Texas State, when Jaime brought Rolando to campus. And I know that relationship meant and has meant a lot to Steve over the years, who ended up serving with Rolando on the Texas Institute of Letters Council, and had the great pleasure of driving him to many of those meetings along with their friend Carmen Tafoya. Like everyone who knew and admired Rolando, we were all very saddened by the news of his passing earlier this year. So when Dr. Jaime Chahin and Dr. Arturo Madrid approached us asking if we would be willing to host an event like this someday, our response was immediate of, hell yes, we want to do that. If you haven't gotten a chance, Steve did a little exhibit of materials in our foyer, so as you're walking out today, please stop by and see that exhibit case. And I think Nick Canellas has books for sale too, so there are so many opportunities to enjoy today. We're honored that you are here, and we're greatly appreciative to be able to work with this esteemed steering committee, Dr. Jaime Chahin, Dr. Arturo Madrid, along with Dr. Nicolas Canellos and Dr. Jaime Mejia. Thank you all. It's a joy to work with you. We're grateful to all the participants here with us today, and also those who submitted video tributes. We'd also like to thank all of those, especially the family who sent us photos of Rolando, and for the family for giving us their blessing to have this event today. We're glad you are here. We're glad all of those who are on looking at us with live stream. Hopefully they got a good view and a good sound of the mariachis, probably quite as good as what we got here today. But I'll get out of the way, and it's my pleasure to now turn things over to Dr. Jaime Chahin, our Dean of College of Applied Arts here at Texas State, longtime friend and donor to the Whitliff Collections. You may know, you may not know, Jaime is quite a force here at Texas State, so we are always appreciative of him being such an advocate for the Whitliff Collections. And he, as you know, of course, was a dear friend of Rolando's. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jaime Chahin.
Buenas tardes and welcome to the Wittliff Collection and the celebration of Rolando Hinojosa's life and work. First, I want to thank Rolando's family, his daughters, Karen and Clarissa, who were not able to join us this afternoon due to health reasons. Also, I want to thank the Whitliff staff, the organizing committee, writers, poets, filmmakers, and all his friends near and far who joined us in this celebration. We're also here to celebrate his stories that Rolando left behind for us in his writings. I first met Rolando 50 years ago in 1972 as one of his undergraduate students, and I was privileged to be introduced to Por esas cosas que pasan in 1973 to Estampas de Valle y otras obras, y todos los acontecimientos of people, places, and events that resonated with his stories. He clearly placed a narrative on the untold stories of the border communities, such as Eagle Pass. Dr. Hinojosa provided us with an accurate, culturally responsive, and indeed authentic depiction of the South Texas experience or Tejano or Valleyites. It is written in English, Spanish, and Chicano idioms, which widens the window of access for the more general readership. The 15 books of Rolando Hinojosa's Klail City Death Trip series attest to the 250 years of Spanish and Mexican presence in the lower Rio Grande Valley. A strong emphasis is placed on the bilingual and bicultural elements of South Texas in Belkin County. The work of Rolando exceeds universal standards of excellence, thus satisfying the hardest critics. Rolando's 15 series novels are available in Dutch, German, French, English, and Spanish, thus confirming the value and quality of his writings. His work was recognized by Quinto Sol, Casa de las Americas, and the National Book Critics Circle, while he received the Ivan Sendrov Lifetime Achievement Award. Characters or personajes such as Rafa Buenrostro, Jesús Malacara, Esteban Echavarría, Pega Lindo, Viola Barragán, and Becky Escobar, and Mansur Shahin, or some of the over 1,000 cast of characters that appear and disappear in the novels, as documented by German scholars. When the reader knows the character and their environment, these characters could clearly be seen at the Sunset Bar in Eagle Pass, where you could hear stories about Korea, Vietnam, the New York Yankees, y todos los diferentes personajes de la comunidad. Today, we're blessed to have an accomplished group of writers, filmmakers, scholars, willing to share their thoughts and to celebrate the life and legacy of Rolando Hinojosa, whose spirit lives on within our hopes and dreams. I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Jaime Armin Mejia, English professor at Texas State University. Dr. Mejia has written about Rolando Hinojosa and will share the interpretation of his work and some of his thoughts. Please welcome Jaime Armin Mejia.
Thank you very much, Jaime, el otro Jaime. Let me see if I can put on my glasses. Those mariachis, hard act to follow. So I was first introduced to Rolando Hinojosa's works as a graduate student at Pan American University in the early 1980s when studying under Dr. Patricia de la Fuente. When accepted to a doctoral program at Ohio State, I went there knowing my dissertation would cover the works of Hinojosa. At the end of my first quarter at Ohio State, a professor there notified me that Hinojosa would be speaking at a luncheon for college professors at the National Council of Teachers of English conference in San Antonio in late November. I managed to get funding to go there and contacted Rolando about meeting him after the luncheon. He agreed, and that was the first time we met. I had many questions based on my readings of his works up to that time. He graciously answered my questions and engaged me in a rich conversation about his background and about his overall literary project. We stayed in touch, and I later organized to have him visit Ohio State to do a reading. We had a marvelous time together, and his visit allowed me to deepen my relationship with him. He later recommended me for the job I currently hold here at Texas State, and my coming here allowed me to continue my relationship with him, one I've always cherished because of his gracious generosity in teaching me how a Valley writer works. As his literary project continued to grow, becoming the Klail City Death Trip series, I avidly kept up with everything he published and everything published about him and about his works. His approach to creating his works challenged me on many levels because he kept changing how he wrote his novels, using completely different genres from one work to the next. His serial works, nevertheless, almost always kept his two principal characters, Jesús Malacara and Rafe Buenrostro, as central characters. Besides changing the literary genres he used for writing his novels, he also wrote and published his novels in English and Spanish. I discovered that unless you read both language versions, you wouldn't see his serial project in its entirety because he'd include important details in one language edition that he left out of the other language edition. This meant one had to read both language editions if one was to have a comprehensive and complete understanding of the history that had shaped, a complete understanding of the entire serial project. You have to read both languages. So Rolando Hinojosa always kept things interesting, tripping up literary critics who stayed with only one of the two language renditions of his critical work, in their critical work. To say the very least, Rolando always enjoyed tripping up his critics. Further confounding his critics was the fact that Hinojosa's works were always rich in specific aspects to Valley history that few were aware of even in the 1980s and 1990s. It wasn't until the publication of David Montejano's monumentally important history of Texas Mexicans that one could fully understand Rolando Hinojosa's project. Coming across Montejano's work, Anglos and Mexicans in the Making of Texas, 1836 through 1986, in the library at Ohio State, proved pivotal to my understanding of the history that had shaped my life, but also the lives of Texas Mexicans up to that point in time. Curiously enough, Hinojosa's works preceded Montejano's, but both were complementary to each other, as the majority of Montejano's work focuses on Valley history. More importantly, when reading Bad Mexicans, more recently, when reading Bad Mexicans, Race, Empire, and Revolution in the Borderlands by Kelly Lytle Hernandez, I found it curious that she ends her history of the Magonistas in the Valley. Hinojosa, in his early serial works, focuses in no insignificant manner on the seditionists of 1915 in the Valley, which Lytle Hernandez confirms as belonging to the same political movement as the Magonistas. I think Rolando would have been absolutely thrilled to read Lytle Hernandez's work, Bad Mexicans. But he would have also been quick to remind you that he covered them first in his early literary works. Today, we have a rich body of academic histories which have filled in the erased history of Mexican Americans along the borderlands. Not too surprisingly, it's literary artists like Rolando Hinojosa who actively participated with their critical imaginations by filling in this important part of our history and culture with bad Mexicans, what Rolando Hinojosa called claros varones de Belkin, fair gentlemen of Belkin County. As Ward Albro would have been quick to remind us, the Magonistas were political activists for justice and equality in Mexico against tyrants like Porfirio Diaz. Along the border in the Valley, we also had Texas Anglos who were tyrannical against Texas Mexicans, and Rolando Hinojosa in his serial project never shied away from exposing their racism. Always falling back on the historical context that makes up the lives of Valley Texas Mexicans, Hinojosa had his principal characters, like Esteban Echevarria, voice their strong views about the illegal and corrupt dispossession of lands and the abuse of our civil rights. Whether representing the lives and hard work of migrant farm workers or of Texas Mexicans in the Korean War, like Tomas Rivera did before him, Hinojosa highlighted the irony and hypocrisy of Anglo domination. But Hinojosa, true to his democratic vision, could always see ways Texas Anglos and Texas Mexicans could live alongside each other as equals and sometimes as marriage partners, as seen when Rafe Buenrostro marries Sammy Jo Perkins, the daughter of the Anglo tyrant Noddy Perkins. Theirs wasn't the only interethnic marriage featured in the Klail City Death Trip series. Viola Barragan, one of the strongest Texas Mexican female characters in the canon of Chicanx literature, marries and becomes widowed more than once to men who are not Texas Mexicans. In my view, she stands as one of the most overlooked female Texas Mexican characters in Chicanx literature. In her, Hinojosa creates one of the strongest Chicana characters who indeed reflects a cultural reality that was the source of Hinojosa's creation. Texas Mexican culture is filled with strong, independent, Texas Mexican women who stand as equals in their marriages and relationships with men, whether the men be Anglo or Texas Mexican. In them, Hinojosa could easily be said to have created Claras Damas de Belkin. One of the most noteworthy female characters in Hinojosa's serial project, of course, is Becky Escobar, who's first introduced as a highly anglicized Texas Mexican character. Her creation allows Hinojosa to engage the very important issue of assimilation, which Texas Mexicans have long had to contend with, especially as we confront Texas Anglo domination. The reversal in cultural and ethnic identity Hinojosa enacts for Becky, where she abandons her Anglo assimilation and returns to her Texas Mexican cultural roots, couldn't have been more timely. Everywhere one goes today, one sees the forces of Anglo assimilation and domination impacting our Texas Mexican ethnic identity. Few authors today, of whatever ethnic American background, have engaged this aspect of American identity construction as well as Hinojosa has throughout his entire literary project, and especially in his novels Becky and Her Friends and Los Amigos de Becky. What Hinojosa has done for us in his truly inimitable style is to lead the way to what's possible for current and future Mexican-American authors. In my view, the works he published in Spanish or through translanguaging between Spanish and English represent his best expression of who Valley Texas Mexicans are. These works represent a significant challenge to students of his works because of the climate of Anglo assimilation that exists in this country today. By reversing and reclaiming this aspect of our linguistic, cultural, and ethnic identity, we will be recuperating what Anglo domination has historically taken away. And by conducting this type of recuperation, we'll gain deeper insights into those other forms of Spanish colonization, which have also stripped away important aspects of our varied and important indigenous cultural heritage, which we will also have to reclaim to stay true to our ethnic heritage and ethnic histories. I strongly believe Rolando Hinojosa would strongly approve of moving in this direction because of his democratic vision he always held on to and advanced through his expansive literary project, the Klail City Death Trip series. Because in the end, there's no doubt in my mind that Rolando Hinojosa, a Valley man, was and remains a bad, bad Mexican. Un claro varón de Belkin. Thank you.
Joining us now is Mr. Salvador Trevino's videotape. You have it?
The first census in the valley took place in 1750. We are descended from one of 5 brothers who came from Querétaro. Ours was Jose Maria Hinojosa. Since the territory belonged to the crown, it didn't matter if you lived south of the Rio Grande or on the northern bank. Jose Maria and his older brother, Santiago, lived on the northern bank. So when 1750 came around, the crown orders a census, and there's a list of our families there. Because we were all northerners, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas, and Coahuila, those 5 states. Now, of course, other people are coming in and have been coming in, but this is recent. But the mold was already there, and that's why we look the way we do, and we intermarried y todo eso. I first started reading, according to family lore, I taught myself to read in Spanish by memorizing the alphabet and then putting the letters together. And because we lived right on the border, my dad would go across the river and bring me Mexican comic books, and also what they call historietas, little vignettes of life. I was so carried away by reading. I was a very sickly child, so I missed a lot of school. But that was mostly in Spanish. But we also had a nice library in the high school and in the public schools. And in our home, we had some books, and those were in English. So I went back and forth. We spoke Spanish at home. We spoke English at home. We mixed both languages at home. But my mother was a reader, and so was my dad. And they read to each other aloud. And my other brothers and sisters did too. So I just thought everybody in the world read. But I also wrote in Spanish, and the first thing I wrote in Spanish, I was 15 years old. Every summer, I would be sent, literally sent, to Arteaga, Coahuila, a village of some 12 to 1,400 in northern Mexico. In fact, it's so high up there that we could see Saltillo down below. And Saltillo, you know, is like Denver. And I wrote about two campesinos. These field hands are going home after work, and this is during the Revolution of 1910. And then the levy appears. And when the army appears, they're going to be, you know, drafted into, willingly or unwillingly, and most of them unwillingly. And they make a break for it. And one of them is cut down, and he loses his arm and he dies. And the other one is then thrown into the irrigation ditch because he's running parallel to it. And he strikes his head and he's killed. And then the blood spreads all over the irrigation ditch and all over Mexico. I didn't even know the word symbolism. You know, but I said, well, that's how this thing started. At the time, I was the chairman of the modern language department at what used to be called Texas A&I University in Kingsville. Now it's Texas A&M. And I was in my desk, and another Valley boy came in, Victor Nelson Cisneros, who was the dean over at Colorado College. But he was my student then, and he said, here, I have something for you. One was a copy of El Grito. Had no idea that it existed. And there was an interview with Tomás Rivera. And the other book was Y no se lo tragó la tierra. And it was in Spanish, in the U.S., and it was printed. I said, well, this is what I've been wanting to do all my life, you know. Tomás and I were at a conference. We didn't know each other. But when I used to teach at Trinity, Daniel Rodriguez, a buddy of mine, said, I want you to meet Tomás Rivera. I said, oh, my God, that's who I want to meet. It was a conference held at what is now Texas State University in San Marcos, just 30 miles south of it. And we introduced, I was introduced to him, and we talked, and I told him I was a fan, that I had read his book, and the conference lasted about 8 hours, and we didn't go to one single session. We walked about 20 to 25 miles, because he was a great walker like I am. I walk every day. And we just walked around that campus, which was his alma mater for his baccalaureate. It was called Southwest Texas State at the time. And I said, I've got this little thing, which was Por esas cosas que pasan. He said, let me have it. I said, well, I'll send it to you. What did he do? He sent it to Quinto Sol. And Quinto Sol published El Grito with, the only time we've appeared together, Tomás, Rudy, and I. And I said, I'm going to do what Rivera did. Rivera uses very few names. I do. I identify mine, but he uses very few names. But he presents one people. And what I wanted to show, as well as that, was to make not one protagonist, this man or this woman or these two protagonists, a male. I wanted to show a people, un pueblo. And I didn't identify them by names, but there is no one important person in Estampas. They're all equal. When I wrote and published Klail City, it was the same thing, just an amalgam of people, and with no one more important than the other. So then from there, I published Korean love songs, because I wanted to get a couple of things. I wanted to show us in war, or in commerce, or in school, education. And when I wrote Korean love songs, I said, fine. But I didn't want to write a 19th century war novel. He said, she said, they reacted. So I wrote narrative verse. It isn't poetry, but it's verse. I've always wanted to write, and I continue to write at the highest level that I possibly can. Because my idea of understanding from the reader's standpoint is that there are several levels of reading. Some readers will stay with me at this level all the time. Others then will read maybe at this other level and enjoy what they're reading. Others will read at the very lowest level and still enjoy what it is that they're reading. But I don't want to write down to the reader. In fact, I want the reader to do one thing with me. I want him to collaborate. In other words, I'm engaging him in these stories with these people that he doesn't know. He doesn't know their culture, certainly may not know even the language or on what the culture is based. But maybe they'll pick it up. And with a reader's collaboration, then that's exactly what I want. And because I realize when I teach here and at Minnesota and Trinity, other places that I've taught, that not all the students are going to read at this level. But the writer better write at that level. One of the things, had I chosen to write about Mercedes and called it that, or Weslaco and called it that, or any of the other valley towns and cities and identify them, that would have restricted me, because then I would have adhered to the truth, or in a very narrow sense. But by inventing a county or a bunch of towns and cities with no reference to the ones that I know, but just my fictional word would come out there, and I would be freer, and I'll give you an example in a minute, to write about an event that happened in this town. I might have had Mercedes in mind, I don't know. You want to be a fiction writer, then you have to write fiction. You can invent people, you can invent essays, you can do anything you want to. But it would restrict you by using the actual names and places and sites and all that. I use the history of the place. That's very common. I don't have to change anything. History is there. It was very deliberate for me when I started to write that I was going to put us on the literary map somehow. And not only me, but Rudy and I, of course, and Tomas, and then eventually it grew. But I knew exactly what I was doing. I was going to write about these people whom I knew and was raised with and was part of, so that others would see who we were. And I was very deliberate. I said, I'm going to write about this. And by using prose fiction, I could use the dynamic novel like Estampas, or what is it, Klail City, or I could use narrative verse in Korean love songs, or I could use the epistolary, and hence I wrote Mi Querido Rafa, which I later translated, as you know. But I also wanted to show the women, because the kids would take one course of my work and they say, how come you treat women the way you do? I said, I think you've only read one novel. It helps to read the whole corpus. So when I wrote Los Amigos de Becky, and then I translated it, as you know, Becky and her friends, I said, I want the kids to be able to write whatever they want. Fiction is such a wide open field. It's a genre that knows no boundaries. So epistolary, dialogue, monologues, reportage. I have all of these. Rights to Witnesses that you've mentioned has that. I said, one thing we haven't done is the detective genre. So I wrote in '85, I published Partners. 13 years later, when the violence in the valley or across the river is horrible, I wrote Ask a Policeman. I think the contribution of Chicano women has been very telling on the younger generations of Chicano students, male, but also primarily the female students. They know who Sandra Cisneros is, who Pat Mora is. I make them write poetry in my classes when I teach Mexican-American Lit, they call it here for the sophomores. And I explained to them what Sandra is doing. I said, she's a little girl, but she's an urbanite, and she lives in this Chicago, a city of 6 million or whatever, and she just writes in bits and pieces. But as Esperanza, and that's the character, begins to grow, the chapters are a little longer. I said, notice the structure of what she's doing, not just to know that it's a structure, but how the writer is telling you indirectly, look, she's growing up, and Esperanza is somebody else when the novel is over. Ana Castillo is a very forceful writer, también, very different from Sandra. But she also has something to say, and she says it her way. Pat Mora, an old dear friend, an El Pasoan, just like Jesus Salvador Treviño is a El Pasoan, was a heck of a poet, and it remains so. But to earn a living, she has been writing quite successfully children's stories. That is another avenue that young Chicana women should say, well, why don't I write for kids, for children or whatever? And they do. So their impact is very strong and remains strong. I think it's going to take several directions as to the contribution of what Chicano writers are and will be. Some will continue to write about our history in this country of ours in which we were born, the different things that we have done for it. We've gone into law, we've gone into business, we've served in the army, etc. All the things that we have experienced, as well as the hand labor and everything else. But there's the other set of young Chicanos who don't have to write the way we wrote or about what we wrote. It's going to be about their experience. They will write about Chicanos, as they should, if they know their own culture and background well, but they're going to write about what they know now, what they have experienced. For them to write a migrant novel such as Tomas's, unless they've lived that life, they can't. I mean, I couldn't do it. I have chapters or two because I did pick cotton and I worked in the citrus fields and that type of thing. But my life was not like Tomas's at all. He was not born in the valley. He was born in the Winter Garden area, which is a horrible place. And racism there was even more rampant than it was where I was. Therefore, my characters behave the way they behave. And the young will write about what they know.
Lord, Lord Jesus, who will give a testimony on Rolando. Carmen.
Gracias. Buenas tardes. I am so glad that we started this with mariachis, with a corrido to Rolando, because Rolando loved music, he loved life, he loved humor. I feel a little humble too coming forth for this event. I didn't teach at the same university with Rolando like a few of you had the good fortune to do, Bob Flynn back there. I did not know him as a neighbor. I didn't even live in the same city with him except for a couple of years in Austin when he was the brand new distinguished chair in the English department at UT, and I was a young PhD just finishing up my PhD at UT. I had met him during the early Chicano movement. And I call it the Chicano literary movement because I feel that so much of our concientización began because of the arts. The arts were what carried the message and spread the message and strengthened the people to political action. I met him in 1975 at Floricanto. I don't remember if that was the first time I met him or not, but I had met him before that through his words, because his words carried meaning and they carried power, and they carried a message to all of us who were hungry to see our experiences preserved in literature. We saw each other at readings, at Chicano Studies conferences and whatever, and in 1982 he wrote the foreword to my first solo book, Curandera, and Chicano Lit was a much smaller community at that time than it is now. I remember sitting in the room with Ángela de Hoyos and Cecilio Garcia Camarillo, Tomás Rivera, and we looked at this. We looked at the first line of the prologo. I'm looking for it now because now it's in its 30th edition, and so it's got a beautiful intro before the prologo by Rolando, which was then considered part of the entire volume. We read, I think it was maybe Max Martinez who read that first line out loud and said, "Is this the prologo he sent?" I said, "Yeah." Sabido es que hay gente por ahí que indebidamente se apropia de la poesía como terapia personal, como desahogo estridente y sin razón, y para el colmo de las cosas, como alarde tan hermético como insubstancial. That was the first sentence. That's all he read, and all of us said, wow, that guy really knows how to speak Spanish good. He did. He spoke the most classic, correct, international, standard Spanish, and he spoke our Español, and the Español de las calles, el Español de los ranchos. He spoke it all. He was equally eloquent in English. In fact, I consider him to be trilingue, English, Spanish, and Tex-Mex. So we knew that this guy had all these talents, that you would read his words, and those words were magic. They were entrancing. They would pull you in. And he held that respect from the entire community. But then I served with him on the Tomás Rivera National Book Award Committee for 10 or 15 years together, and that's where I got to know him. That's where I got to see a sharp intelligence that was encyclopedic. We turned to him. He was our internet when we needed to find something out. Y la palabra para tú sabes, esa hierba que lo usan para el diente cuando, oh yeah, you know, lo usan cuando hay dolor de diente y uno lo pone como anestético. Ah, sí, pues he would give us 4 different words for it. One would be the correct Spanish term. One would be lo que le dicen los del campo, los campesinos, the local Spanish term. He would give us the correct English term, and then how it was known commonly in English. The only thing he didn't give us at that moment was the Latin. It was probably because by then we were all overloaded with information. He had this incredible mind and the courage to go with it. No tenía pelos en la lengua. He would say something as he saw it. I remember one evening, we had all decided, we had 2 days to decide after having read all these books that were being submitted, and we came together, and we had pretty much decided, everybody on the committee, yep, this is going to be the one, this is going to be the one, and you know, well, we'll meet tomorrow, we'll take our formal vote, and whatever. And Rolando looked at it, and he was just, something was bugging him, and he was just, you know, you could see the wheels turning. And he said, I need to read it again. So we all went home, came back the next morning, and the next morning, in 15 minutes, the entire committee had changed their minds because of what Rolando said. Because he could see things, he could see through things, he could see below things like X-ray vision or laser vision or one of those Superman type things, but in a literary sense. He could see the meaning, he could see the subtlety, and he could see the mistakes in things. No era criticón, pero era honesto. He was equally eloquent in English, Spanish, and Tex-Mex. And that was great. But what really stayed with you was his gentleness, his respeto a la gente, una manera that was so courteous and so chivalrous to all, and that's what stood out most. Now, we don't want to lose a friend. We don't ever want to lose a friend. When it's a human being like that, especially, that leaves this physical world, you want to hold on to what their smile and their kindness and their spirit gave you in this life. And as a writer, it's a weird thing for me to admit, for any writer to admit that you have no words. But when I thought, what do I say about Rolando? I had no words. Because it was too big, too massive to be able to put into words. So I come here today without my words, but I come armed and enriched by the words of Rolando. We have not actually lost Rolando because we haven't lost his words. His words still breathe and walk and dance and laugh. So in the spirit of his trilinguismo, his extraordinary eloquence, I would like to share with you a few of his words. Some of them are just phrases, and yet they capture you. I want to start with one that shows this courage of his to confront great issues. An issue that is still relevant in today's world, an issue of deportation. And he covered it in 3 lines. And he says, and it's a fake epigraph that he uses in Claros Varones de Belcan. Con que nos quieren deportar, ¿a dónde? A ver, váyanse a los cementerios de este lado del río. Sí, que vayan allí, esos del uniforme, para ver quién llegó aquí antes que nadie. He also had a way of capturing phrases and creating phrases that were so rich that they either must have gone back 300 years or he just invented them that moment. And I'm going to take a couple of excerpts out of Ni con gasolina, talking about racism. El racismo en mi Texas no se quita ni con gasolina. Está tan arraigado y tan difícil de extirpar como los pobres, que según el buen libro, siempre han estado con nosotros. And he goes on in incredible eloquence, but he never stops using these very, very original phrases like, pero sí hubo raza que sufrió y que leyó anuncios en restaurantes que rezaban no Mexicans or dogs allowed y otros insultos nada sutiles en Edna, Refugio, Victoria y otros pueblos. Y ya que estamos con pueblos y ciudades y regiones que la pasaron peor, ahí están San Ángelo, Snyder, Midland y Odessa y otros pueblos de West Texas y hasta ahora en el presente El Paso. Lo escrito es bien poco y se escribe para que los jóvenes tengan cuidado, que recuerden que no todo el monte es de orégano. It goes on. We could go on, but I want to end with a little segment of his that shows this flexibility that it can go from un español muy tradicional y clásico into el español de los ranchos. It's a little segment out of, well, it's from a section called, in El Valle, in the Estampas del Valle, in English it's the valley, Al Pozo con Bruno Cano. And you'll see him start with the more traditional Espanol and then move into the colloquialisms. And I'll just give you a couple of excerpts from it. Don Bruno Cano, a native of Cerralbo, Nuevo León, Mexico, and a resident of Florida, Texas, USA, a widower, childless, and with no visible or apparent progeny, died, according to the death certificate issued at gravesite, of a myocardial infarct that left him like a possum in Seoul. Now, those who knew Cano or Fon say he died of other causes, greed mostly, and an uncontrollable penchant for skinning his fellow man. The night Cano died, he and a sometime friend of his named Meliton Burnias had agreed to dig up a plot of ground which belonged to Doña Panchita Suarez, bone healer, midwife, and general gynecological factotum, and a fare-the-well mender of all pre-owned Virgos belonging to some of the neighborhood girls of all ages. Virginity is a strict requirement in Florida, and thus we have a simple case of supply and demand. Now, Auntie Panchita did, in fact, own the plot used for digging, and the fluorotypes to a man said there was gold buried there or near there. So we come in now at the moment of the digging when Bruno and his accomplice Burnias are digging to find this treasure. It must have been around 3 a.m. with Bruno digging and throwing dirt out and Burnias spreading it around the best he could when there came a sound like tonk. Bruno looked up and then continued to dig some more when tonk, and he dug some more, and the tonk was followed by another and yet another. Meliton, didn't you just hear that? I think we're getting close. What was that? Close. I said, we're getting close here. A ghost? Near? Did you say? What? What did you say? A ghost? Where? A ghost? Here? There, a ghost. Oh dear, my God is clear. A ghost is clear? Is that what you said? God damn it, Meliton, what are you doing? Meliton, answer me. A ghost. Bruno, I got to get out of here. A ghost? Did that idiot Jesus, did he say a ghost? Jesus, save me, Lord. By this time, Burnias was heading straight for the melon patch and making good time. Gano, for his part, began to scream for help, but Burnias was out of earshot by then. He had cleared 2 fences clean, had jumped across 3 fairly wide puddles without trying, and he was then chased by some of the neighborhood dogs. One of them strayed off the chase and sniffed near the hole. Gano looked up, saw something, and he heard a growl. That did it. Gano not only heard the ghost, he had seen it. The dog finished his business, turned around and scratched the ground around him, and some fell on Bruno. Help! Help! Help me! God damn it! Sorry, Lord! Jesus Christ, get me out of here! Help me! Help me out! Somebody! It was close to 5 o'clock now, and here came Don Pedro Zamudio, Flora's one and only mission priest, wending his way to matins when he heard Bruno's screams and cries and curses for help. Don Pedro walked in that direction, peered down the hole and said, "Who are you? What's going on down there?" "Is that really you, Don Pedro?" "This is me, Cano. Help me up, will you?" "What are you up to in this part of town?" Look, get me out of here, and then we'll talk, okay?" "Are you all right? Did you injure yourself when you fell down?" "What? No, I didn't fall down here. Come on, help me get up." "All in good time, all in good time. Now tell me, how was it you wound up down there? And are you sure you're not hurt in some way? I was sure I heard someone screaming." "That was me, but I'm okay, really. Now, for God's sake, hurry up and get me the hell out of..." "Sorry." "And what was it you were about to say, my son?" "Nothing, Reverend Father, sir. Just get me out of this hole, please." "Well, it's this way. I'd like to, but I don't think I can, you know. I mean, you're a little heavy, little fat, you know." "Fat? Fat? Your mama's the fat one." "My what?" "Your mother. That's who, that cow. Now get me the hell out of here. Do it." "Speaking of mothers, friend Cano, maybe yours can get you out of the hole." "Why, you pug-nosed, pop-eyed, overripe, overbearing, overeating, wine-swilling son of a bitch, you do your duty as a priest." "I will, my son. I will," he purred. With this, Don Pedro knelt at the edge of the hole, first a rapid sign of the cross, and skipping the Our Father altogether, Don Pedro started out on the one about, "Clasp, O Lord, this sinner to your breast." And then Bruno let go with another firm reminder of Don Pedro's mother. This time, the reminder was as plain as West Texas, and the birds stopped at mid-trill. For his part, Don Pedro, wearing a resigned, beatific smile, dug deep and came up with his rosary, and rather unexpectedly started on the Mass for the dead. This was just entirely too much for Cano, and what started as a low growl exploded into a high piercing scream directed variously at Don Pedro, his innocent mother, and any and all relatives dead, living, or to come. Cano then gathered another lungful of air at the time that Don Pedro jumped up and extended his arms to form a cross, and not to be outdone, screamed out, "And do take this sinner to your..." But Cano did not rejoin. In fact, Cano was still catching his breath, or trying to, and by the time Don Pedro finished his latest prayer, he leaned over the hole and asked, "Now do you see? Prayers do bring inner peace, don't they? They've stilled your anger, my son, and tempered both our faiths. Rest easy, the sun will soon be coming up, and so will you." Bruno was past caring. Somewhere just after one of the mysteries of the faith or one of Bruno's motherly recollections, Bruno stopped breathing and thus delivered his uneasy soul to the Lord, the devil, or Don Pedro's mother, or none of the above. As may be supposed, no less than 30 of us witnessed, so to speak, the sunrise tableau, but we'd all kept a respectful distance while the one chanted and the other ranted. Be that as it may, Bruno Cano was buried, and in sacred ground to boot. To Don Pedro's keen disappointment, the funeral was more than well attended, and the damn thing was over 7 hours long. 4 orators showed up unannounced, but dressed to the teeth. Black flower, white hat, gold book, and serious as hell. Then there were the 4 choirs, a boys' choir, a girls' choir, one made up of older women, members of the Perpetual Candle, etc., etc. People from all over the valley got word that something was up in Flora, and they came in trucks, bikes, hitchhiking, while the more enterprising ones from Klail leased a Greyhound that already had some people in it who had boarded the bus back to Bascom, and they too joined the crowd. 3 candymen appeared and immediately opened up shop. It was a hot one, and they started selling snow cones left and right. The crowd was later estimated, quite conservatively, I thought, at some 4,000. Some didn't know who was being buried. Most didn't care, of course, had never heard of Cano, but you know how things usually turn out. People will use anything for an excuse to get out of the house. Gracias, Rolando, por tus palabras.
Carmen, gracias por tu testimonio. And now we're going to have some video anecdotes, tributes from Mark, Libator, Manuel Martinez Rodriguez, and Sergio Troncoso. And Carmen Wheels.
Hi, I'm Mark Liberatore. I had the honor of knowing Dr. Rolando Hinojosa Smith for over 30 years. Our connection is twofold. My wife is Ileana Rivera, the oldest child of the late Dr. Tomas Rivera and Concha Rivera. Many of you know that Rolando and Tomas were like brothers. Our other connection is through the close friendship Rolando and I shared with Dr. Arturo Madrid. Starting in 2007 and continuing to his death in 2022, Rolando and I were devoted friends. We spent many hours talking in his UT campus office and exchanged countless emails. Many of you have heard of the Rockford Files television program. Well, these are the Rolando Files. 2 inches and 5 pounds of mostly emails that we exchanged for many years, neatly bound with a shredded Dollar Tree plastic shopping bag. Rolando would love it. He was a prolific and engaging correspondent. One of Rolando's finest qualities was his insatiable curiosity. Here's a sampling of the wide range of themes we discussed in these emails. Portuguese author Jose Saramago, the Panenka penalty kick technique, Flash Gordon movie serials from the 1930s, Lepidamine, the master farter, Machine Gun Jack McGurn, the disappearance of Captain Alfred Lowenstein, and Coitus Interruptus. What a mind! Brilliant man, greatest polymath I've ever known. Excellent scholar. As a writer, Rolando was an exemplary craftsman. Klail City Death Trip is a masterpiece, and Rolando kept all those characters, events, their histories and relationships in his head. Amazing. How he did it, don't know. Rolando had many other marvelous characteristics besides the ones already mentioned. He was charming, interesting, charismatic, fun, well-spoken, and witty with a sly and dry sense of humor. Rolando loved adventure, buffoonery, and road trips. He was an excellent listener, an inspirational man, always learning and always teaching. Having said all that, my very first thought about Rolando is always that he was a decent, humane person, self-aware, genuine, very comfortable in his own skin. He knew his place in the world. Now, let me talk about a few other facets of Rolando's personality. He was elusive, a man of mystery. For all his sociability and friendships, he was a bit of a loner, a renegade, a contrarian. Marched to his own drum. We usually didn't know if he was going to attend the many events he was invited to, and normally he didn't. Another idiosyncrasy of Rolando's was that he rarely provided or paid for food, lodging, or transportation. I called him America's guest and the shameless moocher. He was also known as Senor Sakamokos, and I was Senor Yamimoto no Kamina. No, Rolando's payment were his enthralling stories and his fabulous companionship. However, and this is for Dr. Chain, Dr. Madrid, and Dr. Mejia, Rolando bought me lunch on 3 occasions. First at a barbecue joint in North Austin, next at the Top Notch Diner on Burnett Road, and finally at a Mexican restaurant in Big Wells when we drove to Crystal City to visit Don Tomas's gravesite. We are all Rolando files. I was really lucky to spend time with a wise man like him. He spoke about paying close attention to using your time productively and being aware of your mortality. We are all fortunate to be here to honor Rolando and his memory. Mi tío, I miss him. I love him. Aquí me descanso, or if you prefer, aquí me quedo. Gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Manuel Martin Rodriguez. I'm a professor of Chicano literature at the University of California, Merced. And I wish I could be there with you to pay homage to Rolando Hinojosa, but unfortunately, because of a previous international commitment, I cannot be physically there. However, I'm honored and glad to be able to say a few words about Rolando. I had the fortune of becoming his friend and of enjoying that friendship for many years. And both as a professor of literature and as a friend, I'd like to say how truly remarkable Rolando was on both counts. As a writer, I will not discover anything new to you by saying that he was one of the greatest writers of our time. And in particular, I really like the way in which he was able to bring into contact worlds that are not necessarily thought of being in contact all the time. He was, of course, a Chicano writer. He was, of course, a U.S. writer. But his knowledge and his interaction with European literature, for instance, is something that makes him very special. As a friend, he was really a remarkable person to be around. His sense of humor, his intellect, his ability to remember all kinds of details about his life and his readings and all that, his passion for conversation were really aspects that I treasure to this day. Just talking to him was an experience, something one never forgets, because he would be both clever and funny at the same time. He would share very generously his knowledge about the world and about literature and his reminiscences about the past. And so since the time I first met him, when I was a student, to the late visits that I was able to pay to him when he was already at the residence, I really have enjoyed being part of his life and him being part of mine. And I was also fortunate to take a trip to him, with him to Mercedes, Texas, where I was searching for some early works of his. And so we drove together from Austin to the Valley and spent a few days, and those are really the best moments I can remember of our friendship, because we visited multiple places in Mercedes and he explained their significance to me and in a sense to everybody, because I recorded that and hope to be able to present that interview at some point to a broader audience. So like everybody else, I'm so sorry that he's left us, but so thankful for what he left behind in terms of his works and his friendship. So from here, Rolando, I salute you, and I wish I could do that in person at least one more time. Thanks.
I'm Carmen Bollosa. I'm a Mexican writer, a novelist, a poet, an essayist, and it's my honor to be here today and say some few words about an exceptional writer. A writer that was able to capture the tradition of our literature when the borders were not set the way they are. I'm not saying this way that he is a Mexican writer. I don't think so. I think that what he is precisely an eraser of borders, a writer that accepted the Anglo tradition as well as other European traditions, and also was very much aware of the literature that was happening in the South. When one reads Rolando Hinojosa, one is sure that he is in the big leagues of those like Juan Rulfo that were able to read what was around them, to do not forget, to keep the memory alive, and to make out of their writing a marvel in its own. Not only a testimony, not only a presence, but building an imaginary world, in his case, the Klail City, that the trip, supposing I'm pronouncing it correctly, that brought within that world without borders, that world that accepted us all and reflected not like a realistic mirror, but like an intimate mirror of perception. More similar, I would say, or I would think, to an impressionist. The impressionist artists didn't forget reality. They were, in fact, letting us see reality, but the way we, each one of us, lives through it. That is the case of Rolando Hinojosa. Keeping it up, and that is not the case. He's not like a painter in the sense that keeps it up, living again and flowing and happening. Again, I just want to thank Nicolas Canelos and the organizers of this homage, of the opportunity of saying some few words of a writer that challenged the nationalistic and those dictates of power that ask the writers to help continue keeping the borders alive. He well did not. So, viva Rolando Hinojosa en español y en inglés, en su lengua magna. Muchas gracias por haberme invitado a participar aquí. Thanks again. That's it.
Hi, I'm Sergio Troncoso, and I'm here to pay homage to Rolando Hinojosa and his life and his work. And Rolando was a friend and in some ways a mentor, much like Rodolfo Anaya, whom I also knew very well. And I, as a new author, of course, reached out to them, and they also made an effort to connect with me. And so I have many memories, many interactions with Rolando. And the one I wanted to share with you today was toward the end of his life. He had won the Ivan Sandroff Prize for Lifetime Achievement from the National Book Critics Circle. And so I had organized a reading for him at La Casa Azul in New York City, a Latino bookstore run by Aurora Anaya Cerda. And so I got to hang out with Rolando and read with him and talk to him about several things that night. And I think the thing I remember the most is, first of all, his joy at being recognized beyond Texas at a national level for his work and his lifetime work. And what I found it on the one hand wonderful, poignant, but also a little sad that only toward the end of his life he felt that he was really being recognized. And of course, it was the battle that we talked about, the battle of being read, really by people in high schools, but people in colleges, Chicano literature being widely available in bookstores. And it's a battle we talked about continuing. And I remember what Rolando said to me, that we can't ever give up. You can't ever give up to keep getting our voices in popular form as well as in intellectual forms, like in colleges. And we need to be read. We need to fight those battles outside of ourselves, even when we only have successes here and there. And so I think that's what I remember about that night, talking to Rolando about that. He was definitely very happy, but also felt that there was so much work to do. And so, his work was very important to me in many respects. Certainly his Klail City Death Trip series, which I loved and read, and Dear Rafa, and Becky and her friends. But the book that I actually enjoyed the most from Rolando was his book on Korea and the Korean War, The Useless Servants, which I thought was beautifully written and very important. And it's a book in which, in many ways, the battle for attention and importance and our voice, the Chicano voice, went beyond Texas to take it elsewhere, take it internationally. And I think that's something that really spoke very deeply to me. So Rolando, thank you very much for your life and for everything you did for Chicanos. I'm certainly very grateful. Thank you.
Well, you could just tell jokes.
Dos viejitos más, please.
Many of you are still hanging in here. And finally, we get to project. I hadn't been able to hear very much all afternoon, so I hope you're hearing us now. Good, very good. I'm Arturo Madrid, and I'm a professor emeritus at Trinity University, and with me is my dear friend and colleague, Nicolás Canelos, Brown Professor at the University of Houston and the founder of Arte Público Press, among other published entities. And we're going to have a conversation about how Rolando Hinojosa became a published writer and projected nationally and internationally. And it was due to Nicolás Canelos. And the process will instruct you about a phenomenon that we have been both part of. A little context to start off with. These spaces this space that we're occupying right now, we came to recently, universities. And because we were not in universities, there were not much opportunity for us to present our experience or our cultural expression. And so in the 1960s, 1970s, we had to create our own spaces and our own instruments. And one of the most important of those instruments was publishing houses and journals where we could express our creations. And this is part of that history. We were few and far between. There's many more of us now, but not as many as we should. In the area of writers, for example, Tomas Rivera and Rudy and I, as you heard, and Rolando were pioneers. We now have some extraordinary writers who are part of the national scene. Some of them are here with us today. My colleague and friend who succeeded me at Trinity University, Norma Cantu. We have Carmen Tafoya with us. Reina Grande, who is reigning grandly these days, is with us today as well. And my dear friend and longtime friend, Tino Villanueva, who's here with us as well. So we're very honored to be with you today. I'll say that I want to express our appreciation. Nick will do it himself, but to Steve Coleman and to David Coleman, to Steve Davis and Lida Good, who are our hosts here today, who have done a wonderful job of organizing this. And they're over here to our right. They've really been extraordinary, and we'll eat and feast and talk a little bit subsequently, thanks to their organizational efforts. And to Jaime Chain, of course, who is a power in this institution, but throughout Texas with his work at all. So we thank you, Jaime, and your colleagues and friends who are responsible for putting this event together. I'll start by providing a little anecdote about myself and Rolando Hinojosa, who is a longtime and dear friend. I think Jaime and Nick and I are his longest time professional and personal friends here in this room. There are others, of course. Robert Flynn was a colleague at the Trinity University, but we worked together with Rolando for many, many years. My anecdote is this. Sometime in the mid-70s, shortly after I'd met Tomas Rivera, he called me and said, Arturo, I'm going to send you a manuscript. I need your help in getting it published. I received the manuscript. I believe, and Nicolas will correct me on this, that it was a manuscript of Klail City y sus alrededores. I was just a professor at a university. What do I know about publishing? And reflecting back, I missed a wonderful opportunity. I could have been Rolando Hinojosa's agent. So Tomas didn't stand on ceremony, didn't wait for me to do anything. He sent it over to Nicolas, and the rest is history. So Nicolas Canelos is distinguished for many reasons, but he put together a little revista that I have a little story in, Se Fueron, Revista Chicano-Riqueña, that he put together as an assistant professor out in the middle of nowhere, not in Chicanolandia at all, Indiana. And it was sent there, my story was sent there by Tomas and Rolando. They took it upon themselves to send him the story, and he published. He not only founded La Revista Chicano-Riqueña, then he founded the Revista de las Americas.
Well, it changed names.
Changed names.
Yeah.
And then he went to Houston and founded Arte Público Press, and then he put together the biggest project we've ever had of rescuing Chicano Latino literature in the world, and he's doing that to this day. But back to Rolando Hinojosa. So Rolando Hinojosa, unlike some of our friends and colleagues, went to you and stayed with you.
Thank you, Arturo. And thank you all for being here. Thanks for the organizers. What a wonderful afternoon and memorial for Rolando. When I first met Rolando, I believe some of you were present. Actually, in 1973 and 74, we had the first National Chicano Literature Symposia in Indiana. And Tomas and Rolando came, as did Tomas Ibarra Frausto and Arturo. Both of you at least were in the second symposium, right? And I gave a paper there, and Rolando, on Tomas Rivera, in fact, and he says, well, you know, I would love for you to write about my work. And I really never got to do so for about 20 or 30 years. But little did I know that I would become the publisher of his entire opus, which we are today at Arte Público Press, all of his works, except for some of the works that people have forgotten about that were published in places like Revista Chicano-Riqueña, some of the places that make Rolando a political writer as well, such as the Mexican-American Devil's Dictionary, full of satire, taking apart the political situation. If he were here today in Texas, do you know what he would be saying in that Devil's Dictionary? Man, you know? And so there's all these bits and pieces around the world that have not been collected of Rolando's knowledge and what have you. And when we started Arte Público Press, we drew from Revista Chicano-Riqueña, and we drew from the Quinto Sol that went under, and we became the publishers of record at that point for Chicano literature and New Eurekan literature. And we published, one of the first works that we published after founding Revista was Mi Querido Rafa. I have always seen Mi Querido Rafa as kind of a turning point because it's an experimental novel written in Spanish and English in code switching, right? And it has the two registers in English and 2 registers in Spanish, and they flow together. And when we published it, we knew this, and it sunk like a rock in the ocean. But the next, Rolando rewrote it in English, and it was reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. And all of a sudden it became, you know, a big hit for us, you know. But it's still, nevertheless, irrespective of being a good-selling book, getting the New York Times, being one, you know, it may have been the first Chicano novel to be reviewed in the New York Times, you know. But it's a crucial work because it becomes the crossing point for English and Spanish in his whole trajectory, you see. And it's also one of the last places where his favorite narrator, Pegalindo, comes to tell us that he's dying of cancer and will soon leave his role as a narrator. And so in the next books, there are different types of narrators there, but no one like Rafa Buenrostro, Jeú Maracala, Pegalindo, etc. And he populates the world, as we saw, with 1,000 characters, which brings me to the other point that people do not know about or have not registered, is that Rolando was hidden behind 1,000 characters. Where was Rolando? Where was the real Rolando? They said, well, he had 3 alter egos, Pega and Rafa and Jeú, right? But as Sergio mentioned, the most intimate book that Rolando ever wrote, where he revealed himself, was this very autobiographical story of his serving in the army in Korea. This is the greatest anti-war book written by a Latino in the United States, and barely any scholars have taken it on. And maybe that's my fault, because it was the only book that, at that point, that we published in hardcover. And it didn't sell well enough for us to go into paperback. So it got entombed in a pricey package. What can I say?
Yeah, well, it's plus. Anyway, I was always in awe of Rolando, whom I met very early on, not only about his facility in English and Spanish, ability to move back and forth and correct me on a regular basis or instruct me, certainly, but I was particularly in awe of him because he turned his back on an academic career, on an academic administrative career. He could have easily moved on and become a president at a moment when we didn't have anybody except Tomas Rivera in those ranks. And he turned his back on that, left Chicanolandia, left Texas, and moved to Minnesota, and lent himself totally to writing. You and I have had similar trajectories, but we never quite became writers like this. I wrote a lot of memos and a lot of reports and the like.
No, Rolando did it purposefully, and he maintained his writing profession to the very end. When he came back to Texas in the early 1980s and worked with us, we set about doing what Langston Hughes did also very purposefully, was touring the writers and Rolando to the very small towns because we wanted to grow the literature from the grassroots up, right? So, Rolando, previously there were no publishing houses touring Latinos. So we started touring all over the place, all over Texas. We would arrange for them to go to universities, etc. My wife, Cristelia Perez, raise your hand. You would take the writers on the road. She was their ambassador and set up the engagements. And Rolando, he would take care of her. He was a gentleman, and you think of, well, this man who had done such great things in literature already, he loved to go to the small towns, go to the libraries and the community centers and everything. He just ate it up. That was part of him. And I think that while he was that ambassador from one world to the other that you mentioned, home in two worlds, etc., and he moved in very elite society as well, I think he was most comfortable among the people.
Yes, I would agree, and you're quite right. I mean, he moved very beautifully in English departments. He made many friends in that world, and equally in Spanish departments. But I think his greatest comfort, besides being in the presence of Tomas Rivera, they were dear inseparable buddies. Concha Rivera talked about the fact that she would enter the room where they were talking, and they would go silent. And then when she left, they'd start talking again, and they would just non-stop talking. But he really richly loved talking to people. I learned to listen by listening to him. I didn't have to say anything. He just kept telling me stories and explaining things to me, and I loved it. It was quite wonderful. But going back to publishing him, one of the very troubling parts of our existence in this society, of course, has been our inability to enter into the mainstream of the society, having to create our own paths in order to get there. At a certain moment, Rolando could have done that, yes? He could have left you and gone and become published by a major publishing house.
Oh, absolutely. But that would also have meant that he would have to change what he was writing about and how he wrote it.
And you gave him the freedom to do what he wanted to do.
Not that I gave it to him. I mean, era un don que nos daba a nosotros. That was a blessing for us, It was not that we gave him anything. I mean, that was who he was,
That was who he was. Yeah. What is one of your favorite stories about Rolando? I will tell mine too.
Oh, I don't know. There's so many. We went a few times in Spain. We were going around, etc., and we would get lost and disappear and walk. The stories are always about walking, right? Walking and having a beer. Or walking, and then after the long walk, have ice cream and favorite place in Madrid. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, in my case, Rolando moved to Minnesota, Patty, his wife and mother Karen and Clarissa, entered law school there, and he took position at the University of Minnesota. And they went out and lived in the suburbs, in Dinah or someplace. And I said, Rolando, come live close to the university. There's a house on the corner there, hasn't been able to sell because it's near the freeway, but there's a wall that protects you from. So they sold their house and moved there. And as a consequence, my daughter and his daughters, in particular Karen and Marisa, became very good friends. And they were dingy as hell. I used to call them ding and bat. And we spent lots of time. Carissa was a bookworm. She stayed home and read books. But Karen and Marisa needed to go places. So we spent hours in malls while they ice skated, while they played this and that. And he told me stories. And it was a second education I got through Rolando Hinojosa.
Well, talking about dinghy and walking, I think one of the funniest, oddest stories is that when we were in New York for the National Book Critics Circle Award that he won, the Lifetime Achievement, and we were staying on like 55th Street in the Broadway area, and we decided to hoof it over to the new school, which is downtown, like on 14th Street. And we're walking, we're having a great time, etc. When we finally get there, we walk in, everyone is like, where were you? When you, Rolando, get up there. They're about to announce your name. We hadn't changed our watches. And we had so looked forward to being with each other and talking and walking, and seeing the sights, etc. We almost missed the ceremony. That's dingbat. Me. Mostly that was my responsibility. And then Rolando was, so flustered when he got up there. He said, thank you very much.
And that was our friend Rolando Hinojosa, with whom we spent many wonderful hours and derived extraordinary pleasure. And I want to thank Nicolas Canelos for taking that book and publishing and staying with Rolando for all these years.
Thank you.
Y con eso, el mariachi.
Ya con esta me despido, aquí a presencia de todos.
Okay.
Excellent. So did you